welcome to Discovering the Law. My name is Lucy Rivera and I am the host of this program. This episode can be viewed at www.discoveringthelaw.com. Today we have a very special guest. We have Honorable Judge John Cratsley, who is a retired Superior Court judge and he's currently working at JAMS. And he is here to talk to us about expanding the right of an attorney. How are you, Your Honor?
I'm very well, and thank you for having me on the show.
Well, Your Honor, our first question for you will be, who has the statutory right of an attorney?
Well, actually, Lucy, the right to an attorney in criminal cases is guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States and by the Massachusetts Constitution. So anyone who cannot afford an attorney is constitutionally guaranteed the right to an attorney. What's interesting, though, is whether, and this is being actively debated now, whether there should be a right to an attorney in civil cases. It's been guaranteed in criminal cases ever since the case of Gideon. And so Gideon versus Wainwright, a very important U.S. Supreme Court decision. So they call this entire question about the right to an attorney in civil cases, they call it civil Gideon, based after the Gideon and Wainwright decision. Some statutory rights are to an attorney in civil cases are guaranteed, for example, in care and protection cases where the state is seeking to take a child away from their natural parents. The parents and the child have a right to an attorney. But there are a lot of other areas of civil disputing, if you will, where rights are at stake and losses can be serious, such as eviction cases or immigration cases, and sometimes even in debt collection cases where someone might be losing their car or might be losing their home in a civil case. So should they have the right to an attorney? And that's what this civil Gideon issue is all about. Should we be expanding the right to an attorney into civil areas where the loss to the individual could be quite serious, like losing your apartment or losing your home or losing your car or losing your right to stay in the United States as an immigrant. So that's what the issue is all about. Are there areas of civil law where the loss is almost like the criminal law, where you could be sent to prison, and that's pretty serious, of course, but there are serious losses on the civil side as well. So that's what the discussion's all about.
And should there be attorneys, for instance, in the case of civil cases? Should there be free attorneys?
Well, I think what you have to do is evaluate what the loss, how serious the loss might be. That's why I say the areas that are being debated, and I've been participating in a task force that's discussing whether in eviction cases, say, for example, someone with a disability who's being evicted, or someone who's elderly who's being evicted, certain particularly, where the eviction would be particularly harmful to this person, a particularly serious loss. Shouldn't they have the opportunity to have an attorney? Because the law of landlord and tenant is complex, and it's often difficult for someone to defend themselves without the aid of a lawyer. So the expansion of the right to counsel in civil cases is really proceeding topic by topic, starting with things like evictions and immigration is, of course, another big debated area because of what's been happening in our country at the present time.
And should, for instance, in this case of immigration, from what's happening in this country where there are unaccompanied minors from Central America, should these unaccompanied minors be have a right to an attorney?
Well, that's what you hear in the discussion now. Is there are so many of them? They're being relocated in so many different states, including a current discussion about relocating some right here in Massachusetts.
Yes.
But as they go before immigration judges to determine whether they can stay, if they have family here, they're entitled to stay in the U.S., or should they be deported, again, the immigration laws are very complex, and I personally think they should have the right to an attorney. And so there are advocacy groups in the immigration field that are arguing strenuously that the government should come up with enough money to provide lawyers for these children as they go through these difficult. I mean, imagine a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or an 8-year-old trying to represent themselves. It makes no sense at all.
A refugee
Right.
And typically our country takes refugees.
Yes.
Do you believe in the jury system?
I think the jury system is the best way to resolve the kinds of difficult cases that come through our courts, criminal cases and civil cases. It means that the community votes. You get a representative selection of jurors. Jury selection is largely in the hands of the lawyers to figure out what jurors they want to have on the jury. And you may be aware there's a rather lively debate going on right now about whether we should have more opportunity for lawyers to interview the prospective jurors. A bill just recently passed the House of Representatives that would give private attorneys, rather than judges, more time to interview the jurors face to face. But that's a sort of a side issue, but that's all part of getting a truly representative jury. If you expand what lawyers can ask jurors instead of just letting the judge ask the jurors, it would arguably give you a more representative jury. But in any event, my experience on the court, my 30-some years as a judge before I retired, I believe the jurors almost always come up with a good, sensible, logical decision. I've so rarely disagreed with their outcomes, and I think it's an expression of our democracy. It's an expression of how we want our citizens to participate. And, you know, I also really like to say, I have a chance on this TV show to say this, people who called for jury duty should come and serve. It's a public responsibility to be a juror. And people often say, oh, well, it's an inconvenience and I don't want to do it. But they should remember that the right to jury trial for everyone is only guaranteed if everyone participates. And the right to have a representative jury that looks like your community only occurs if everyone shows up and participates as a juror.
Yes.
So I want to make a little pitch for serving on the jury and coming when you get your summons.
Yes, and then you should, and I agree with that. It's a very important service, and judges are also a very important aspect of this equation.
And judges can be jurors now.
And judges can, yes.
There's no exclusions anymore.
Everybody can be a juror.
Unless you have some bias or prejudice or some personal issue why you can't be fair and impartial for the particular trial. But otherwise, everyone has to show up.
Their duty.
Yes, exactly.
Now, Your Honor, what do you feel about judges in general, their positions as to Massachusetts? How does a judge get to become a judge, whereas other states you can elect them?
You probably know, Lucy, we're one of the few states that have the appointment by the governor, by the chief executive, similar to the way federal judges, U.S. judges, are all appointed by the president.
Yes.
And here we're appointed by the governor. But so many other states around the country elect judges, and I feel that we're very fortunate here because we have life tenure. Well, we have mandatory retirement at 70, but we have life tenure. We have the job once we are confirmed, picked by the governor and confirmed by the governor's council. We have the job without having to run for election, without having to worry whether some decision we made might be used against us in an election. So I'm very positive. I favor our appointed system of judges over elections. The real problem with elections is who puts the money into the election. Now, of course, it's going to be the lawyers who are then going to appear in front of the judge, and doesn't the judge remember who paid for his campaign or her campaign?
Right.
So I'm 100% in favor of our Massachusetts system of lifetime appointment.
Thank you, Judge Cratsley. I want to remind everyone in the public that this is Honorable Judge Cratsley, who is a retired judge now, but he works for JAMS, and he has had an incredible career of 37 years.
33.
33 years, I'm sorry. And by way of your background, most recently you were a Superior Court judge, but prior to that, what other positions?
Well, I was on the parole board, the
Right.
state parole board, where we went to prisons and voted on who should be released from prison.
Yes.
And then I was at the Roxbury District Court for 10 years. And in between the Roxbury District Court and the Superior Court, I worked for Attorney General Frank Bellotti as chief of his Public Protection Bureau, doing supervising attorneys that were doing essentially public interest litigation, like environmental protection cases and consumer cases and civil rights cases.
It's an illustrious career. There is a project you're working on, Judge Cratsley, Restorative Justice. Tell us about that. Tell us what is restorative justice?
Restorative justice is a very distinct alternative to the court system.
Okay.
It's an approach, particularly for young offenders and victims, in which they participate in something so different from court called a sentencing circle. And the program I'm involved with, which is in my hometown of Concord and 12 other communities, basically relies on referrals from the police department. Individuals, often property crimes, often first offenders, where the police make a decision that not to send the case to the court for arraignment, but with the consent of the victim and an interest in the restorative process, to bring the case to the restorative justice program.
Okay.
And then if the victim agrees and the offender agrees, a sentencing circle is held. It's a circle like this room, except there'd be maybe 10 or 12 people all sitting in a circle, be the offender, the victim, the families involved, the community representative, the police, the folks from the restorative program, and everyone holds something called the talking piece. And you hold the talking piece, and when you hold it, you talk. And so the victim will tell the offender face to face how he or she was hurt, the pain they felt, the harm that was done to them. Then maybe the community member will hold the talking piece and talk about how the community peace was broken here and what it means when something, some kind of a breaking and entering or an assault and battery or property damage, how it hurts the community. And the police will hold the piece. Then the offender will hold it, and hopefully we'll talk about how sorry he or she feels and how much this has helped them understand the harm that they've done. It's a very healing kind of process, and eventually, with the help of the restorative justice staff who kind of run the circle, a repair plan is put in place where the offender will agree to do a number of steps to make the victim whole, perhaps some restitution or community service, maybe a letter of apology, perhaps something they'll do in their school, their education, something to help their education. And then the program staff will watch over time, does this repair program get fulfilled? Is it all done? Is it carried out? And if it is, over time, 3, 6, 9 months, then the case goes to a closing circle with more apologies and statements of understanding, and then eventually the case never goes to court and the young person has no record.
In what cases is this restorative justice more beneficial?
Well, it works best in my experience. Well, I'll just mention as I'm on the board of our program, and I went to watch one of these circles involving some middle school students that had done some type of property damage at their school that was potentially extremely harmful to the school, and they worked out a repair plan. It was a group of young people, and they each had their own separate circle, and the school officials participated. Community officials participated, the police participated, the families of all the young people participated. So that's one type, property crime of some sort or another. I think with the cooperation of the victim, it could also be some type of a break into a home or some type of assault and battery. As I say, usually it's a first offender, and usually it's someone who would otherwise go to juvenile court or just barely be going into adult court. The idea being that if they honestly express their apologies and the victim has a chance to talk about how it hurts them, the thinking is the offender will learn a lot more about the significance of their crime.
Do you feel this program is effective?
I do. We've done some statistical work on whether or not the folks that go through restorative justice repeat. And our data would indicate it's lower. There's less, we call it recidivism, but that means basically repeating in a year or two another crime. And our data would indicate that we have a lower recidivism rate than those who go to court. So we're very confident that this process is getting into the heads of the offenders and making them think seriously about whether they would ever do another crime.
Your Honor, do you think this program can be replicated in other communities?
Oh, it's slowly being repeated. Schools, our own program has a grant to develop this program in the Malden school system.
Okay.
But I think it can be used, I think particularly in schools, in public schools. I think it can be used in other communities. It takes the cooperation of the police department. We have to have a very committed police chief who says, yes, I'm going to encourage my officers to select some young people to go into a restorative justice program as opposed to taking them to court for traditional prosecution.
And who is involved in the circle?
Well, the circle involves the offender, the victim, the families of the offender and the victim, the police, representatives of the community, and 2 or 3 of the restorative justice volunteers, basically, who have been trained in the principles of restorative justice, and they help move the process along. They help construct the repair plan for the offender, the things the offender is going to do to make good and show his apologies to the victim.
Great. That's excellent work. And how are you involved in this?
Well, I'm on the board of
Okay.
directors of our program.
Very good.
That's my main role there is as a retired judge to talk a little bit about with our board members about what kinds of cases we ought to be accepting and sometimes guide a little bit of the relationships with the police departments.
Very interesting. To your knowledge, is this the only community that has it? That has implemented it?
There is restorative justice going on in Western Massachusetts, and it's quite interesting because it's at the other end of the criminal process. And this is done I know it's out in the Springfield, Northampton area, but it's also going on in other parts of the country where offenders who finish their prison sentence do a restorative circle with the person they offended against because they're coming back into the community. So if they're going to shop in the same store with someone that they offended, or they're going to live in the same neighborhood, they want to have a talking out process of, okay, what's it going to be like when the person who might have robbed me or broke into my home is going to come back in the community. So that's restorative justice at the coming out of prison end, whereas the program I'm involved in is actually taking young people right away from deferring them or away from going to court.
Excellent. Excellent. And Your Honor, you are currently working for JAMS. And what is JAMS and what do you do there?
JAMS is actually, it is a bunch of letters for Judicial Mediation and Arbitration Services. And so retired judges, we're not all retired judges, but most of the people, we call ourselves neutrals because we're neutral mediators, neutral arbitrators. And most of us are retired judges, not everyone. And we take on disputes that are brought to us. Some will come from the courts, some come privately from folks that are having business. A lot of our work are business disputes, contract disputes, insurance disputes. And we use the processes of mediation, which is very different from arbitration, and so we do both. We do mediation, which is a voluntary dispute settlement process, and we do arbitration, which is a lot like judging. Our arbitration leads to a binding decision. In mediation, the mediator is simply a facilitator, someone trying to help 2 people disputing to figure out if they have common ground, if they can find a solution with the mediator's help.
And do you feel mediation is effective?
I think it's extremely effective and extremely helpful. It doesn't work all the time because it is voluntary, and some folks can walk away and do walk away and say, I just can't accept this settlement, or I can't make this commitment, or I can't make this compromise. I just can't do it. I want to go on to court, But we experience easily a 60% success rate overall. And so it's, what I basically say is to folks, to lawyers who are counseling their clients, to clients if they're listening to me, you should try mediation. It's voluntary, it's inexpensive, it's efficient, it doesn't take the 2 to 3 years of a time that a civil case might take in the court system. And you don't have to go up and you don't have to look at 12 strangers on the jury, and you don't have to be cross-examined on the witness stand. It's very informal, casual, relaxed, and it's private. And if you want to try to work out your dispute in a much more comfortable, faster economic setting, try mediation.
Very good. So begs the question, are there cases that are better for that kind of arrangement?
Well, I mean, you can think of ones that would be particularly appropriate, like a family dispute, or someone who's going to continue to do business together. One of the kinds of mediation that really is quite relevant to your viewers, I think, is what we call community mediation. It's available at the local courthouses, like Dorchester District Court or Roxbury District Court, and there will be mediators that can do small claims cases and landlord-tenant disputes. And sometimes if, for example, you have a dispute with your car mechanic, and you actually would like to keep that mechanic for the future working on your car, but you have some real dispute that happened the last time you were there, mediation might work, because it might allow you to keep a relationship going and yet get your problem solved outside of court and fairly rapidly, fairly efficiently.
So as a mediator, what do you do as a mediator?
Okay, let me give you a little, I'll give you the short version of mediation. So when the parties agree, and in the mediations I do at JAMS, we always have lawyers and clients. The mediations that happen in the community courts, the mediations I just talked about with your dry cleaner or your auto repairman, I mean, that's often just the two folks without lawyers. But my main mediations have attorneys and clients. And so we begin in an opening session with everybody in the room, and we ask each of the lawyers to give an opening statement of what the dispute is about. That can sometimes be a little bit rigid because we really want to move toward settlement. But we give everybody a chance to get it off their chest, to sort of say it all. And you would also say to the clients at the same time, do you want to add anything? Is there anything you want to add to what your lawyer has presented? And then we break up into private sessions called the caucus is the name. So I would start with one side and meet with them privately and say, now you know what the other side said in the public session. But what are you really trying to accomplish? What are your interests here? What would you like to see happen today? And what kind of flexibility do you have toward a settlement? And you begin to get some ideas. And so someone may say, well, I heard that they're not going to pay me a penny. I heard they're not going to offer me anything. But I'll and I know that I wanted $100,000. But you know, if they could get off of zero, I might come down to $75,000. That's just a very simple example. So you move back and forth, and then you go to the other side.
Well, there are great benefits to mediation, Your Honor. Unfortunately, we have run out of time in our program, in our segment. But we want to thank you very much. We would like to thank our viewers for your attention. Today we had Honorable Judge Cratsley here to talk to us about expanding the right to an attorney and mediation, among other very important things. This show can be viewed at www.discoveringthelaw.com, and my name is Lucy Rivera. Thank you for watching.